the Wall Street Journal this morning has an editorial that says you're going to talk on this program about discharge petitions,
yes.
and we haven't talked about it.
No, we've got to. Now, there is a great editorial here. We've got, see, one man with courage is all it takes. There's this congressman from Oklahoma, Inhofe, who basically has said there's a gag rule. And this keeps good legislation like term limits, which we want. See, we've asked for we've said, come up with your overall plan to balance a budget, then have a term limits law that kicks in if you don't stay on schedule. That's discipline on spending. Okay, term limits, balanced budget amendment, line item veto, all these things get locked up, and there's this little rules committee, and there's the gag rule. We want to get rid of the gag rule. We want to get this legislation moving. We've got a chance to do it on September the 8th.
That was Ross Perot in an interview on C-SPAN August 19th, 1993. You heard Ross Perot preview an event happening a few weeks later. So let's jump to that event. September 8th, 1993, a press conference on Capitol Hill. The topic, the Discharge Petition. Ross Perot was surrounded by members of both parties.
Well, this is a great day for our country. I'm certain that the framers of the Constitution and the signers of the Declaration of Independence are looking down from heaven, smiling on this reform. For 63 years, the handful of leaders in the House of Representatives decided the agenda, not the members of the House. This was an unlikely event to occur, but it did occur because of the leadership and the courage of the people who signed that petition.
Later in that press conference, Ross Perot previewed something novel, a discharge petition song.
Now, to anybody who wants to play games with us, we've got a new song that we will start singing at all of our rallies. And the name of that song is I'll Remember in November. Now, these folks obviously are listening to their constituents. And this song, I'm not going to read all the verses. They're good humors, but it'd take too long. But I'll just read the refrain that says it all. It certainly doesn't apply to the people who signed this. It certainly doesn't apply to the people who vote for it. It does apply to anybody who wants to play games with it. And the refrain is very simple. I will remember in November as I step into that little booth. I'll remember in November to vote for anyone but you.
On September 28, 1993, 3 weeks after Ross Perot showed up on Capitol Hill, the House approved the Discharge Petition Disclosure Bill. It required that the names of members who signed a discharge petition be made public until the required number of signatures, typically 218, was reached. And that changed everything. You've probably heard lots of talk about the discharge petition, but you might not really understand what it is or how it works. Or you might not know that until the 1993 reform that Ross Perot advocated, the names of members of Congress who signed a discharge petition were kept secret. Well, Scott Wong to the rescue! Scott Wong has covered Capitol Hill for over 16 years. He joined NBC News as a senior congressional correspondent in 2022. He previously reported on Congress for Politico and The Hill. He has covered 5 House speakers, 2 Donald Trump impeachments, and reported from inside the Capitol during the January 6th attack. Scott Wong has reported on countless congressional legislative battles and leadership fights. Yes, Scott Wong is a true political junkie. You've seen and heard him on C-SPAN many times sharing his in-depth knowledge of Congress. And now we welcome him for the first time ever to a C-SPAN podcast, the Extreme Mortman podcast. In this episode, Scott will explain the discharge petition, and he'll illustrate its practical use by discussing 3 real-life and very recent examples on issues many Americans care about. Hello, Scott Wong.
Hey, Howard, how are you?
I'm doing great. I have to, all right, Scott, I know we have lots of clips to play, lots of material here, but when you came to me and you said you want to do the podcast, and I said, come up with any topic, we'd love to have you on, you came up with a discharge petition.
I sensed a little skepticism on your part when I started talking about this wonky, arcane procedure. But I'm glad we're here doing this. And, as you mentioned, there are some real life implications to this discharge petition. Essentially what it is, when any rank and file lawmaker puts forth a discharge petition, they have to collect 218 signatures. If they do that, they can force a vote on any piece of legislation. And the reason why this is important is oftentimes Speaker Johnson, members of his leadership team, don't want to pursue certain pieces of legislation. Well, this is a way for rank and file members to work around this. And in fact, Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican from Pennsylvania, has said, this is not a tool of the minority. This is a tool of rank and file members on both sides of the aisle. And really, we have seen this, we have seen Democrats and Republicans in these recent months come together to really put forward these types of discharge petitions on really important issues, including the Epstein files, including the ACA subsidies. We could see a lot more in the coming months.
All right, so we're going to run through a bunch of examples, as you say, real life issues that affect everybody. Actually, since you mentioned Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican of Pennsylvania, I actually want to play first a clip from the last Congress. This is Representative Fitzpatrick, March 6, 2024, joining a bipartisan group of House members talking about their border security and foreign aid legislation.
I understand you want to put this bill, whatever the final product is, through normal procedure on the House floor. But at what point do you try to collect signatures for a discharge petition to put it on the floor? Because, like you said, you described it as a timely, time-sensitive, and existential matter.
So it'll be eligible as of this Friday, I believe. And there are two options. Leadership can agree on putting a bill to the floor, which, by the way, will have to be a two-party solution because it won't be able to get through Rules Committee, and it's questionable whether this could get through suspension. It might. And if that doesn't happen, just so everyone's clear about how this discharge works, it was crafted through a lot of painstaking work with the parliamentarian to allow us to make one amendment in the nature of a substitute and also to bypass the Rules Committee, and that's important. So if this gets to the floor, it doesn't have to go to Rules, because we all know that that would mean death to this bill, given the current makeup of the Rules Committee. If we get 218 signatures, 2 days later, I can make a privilege motion on the floor, and it goes right to the floor, and it only needs 218 votes, which obviously would get if it had 218 signatures on it.
Scott Wong.
Yeah, I mean, the Rules Committee is a committee that is tightly controlled by the Speaker of the House. So let me sort of rewind. If the Speaker of the House says, I don't really want to pursue that bill, this allows these members to work around the Speaker of the House. And, the reason that's significant is because it essentially is the rank and file lawmakers taking back power from the leadership, where you have leadership that are saying, my way or the highway. Well, this is a workaround for these rank and file members. And, the first time I had actually seen a discharge successfully used was 2015. So now, over 10 years ago, this was the Speaker Boehner era. These were the waning days of Speaker Boehner. And conservatives were trying to kill what we remember as the Export-Import Bank. This is a bank that guarantees loans for U.S. companies that are doing business overseas. And Speaker Boehner wouldn't bring a bill to the floor to renew XM Bank. It expired. Its authority expired. But there was a successful discharge petition effort, Republicans and Democrats joining hands together, and they were able to not only renew but actually restore the XM Bank. It passed the House and the Senate. So we have seen rare examples of this being used in the past, but we have seen more of a flurry of activity surrounding discharge petitions in recent years.
Okay, in a second I want to play a clip from the current Speaker Johnson, but I have two questions based on that. One very in the weeds, one very basic and practical, the one big picture practical. Why 218?
218 is simply half of the House of Representatives 435. So it's a simple majority of the House of Representatives. It's essentially saying this is the will of the House of Representatives.
Okay, so that leads to a bigger picture question. So you mentioned chaos, the word chaos. Is or maybe I'm mentioning the word chaos, but doesn't this lead to chaos? Wait a minute, sorry, you said will of the people. I'm thinking chaos. Can you play both ways, or is this what if you're the Speaker? Is it chaotic to have suddenly the majority not lead you anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. Last year, we at NBC wrote a story saying, essentially asking the question, is Speaker Johnson losing control of the House? Because you had multiple examples of not only Democrats, but specifically Republicans leading the charge on many of these discharge efforts, including with the release of the Epstein files, including with trying to restore the ACA subsidies that expired at the end of the year. And essentially, it was the rank and file members taking back control, trying to push forward legislation, making various things happen. In some of those cases, they were successful. And so, the Speaker has been losing some control over the floor. He's trying to reassert his authority, but it's a little bit of a push and pull, especially when you have such a narrow majority. I think the majority right now, as we tape this, is 218 to 213. It's always in flux. We recently had the death of a Republican member, Doug LaMalfa from California. MTG recently resigned her position, so things are always moving. That majority is perilous for the Speaker, and I think that in large part is why we're seeing, so many of these discharge petitions with this very, very narrow majority.
Okay, so you mentioned Speaker Johnson. Let's hear a clip. Let's go to December 17th, 2025. Speaker Mike Johnson talks with reporters, and this exchange with Manu Raju of CNN.
Look, we're working through very complex issues, as we do here all the time. It's good. Everybody's working towards ideas, keeping the productive conversation going. That's what happens.
Have you lost control of the House?
I have not lost control.
Because this is the third time.
Look, we have the smallest majority in U.S. history. Okay? These are not normal times. There are processes and procedures in the House that are less frequently used when there are larger majorities. And when you have the luxury of having 10 or 15 people who disagree on something, you don't have to deal with it. But when you have a razor-thin margin, as we do, then all the procedures as well as people think are on the table.
So, Scott Wong, all that sounds correct, is exactly as you're saying. It's a razor-thin margin. These are procedures. Speaker Johnson said he hasn't lost control of the House. Can they all be true at the same time?
Well, I think another aspect of this, in addition to the very, very narrow majority, is the fact that President Trump, who essentially controls this party, has run the Republican Party, his poll numbers have been sagging lately. He's been going down on the polls. He's also a lame duck president. As far as we know, won't be running for a third term for the presidency. And so I think some Republican members of Congress are feeling a little bit more emboldened. They're freelancing a bit and willing to defy him, even though he hasn't wanted them to pursue some of these pieces of legislation, and has really, in some respects, actively tried to stop them from going down this path, especially on the Epstein files. I think that may be also a key part of this, is that members are focused on 2026. They're running their own races, and also the fact that President Trump's poll numbers are declining.
Okay, we're going to go through three, as you say, real-life examples that affect everybody in a second. One last question before we get to those. If there was a big majority, as you've been saying, razor-thin majority, but if it was the old days of like 95, 97, 99, when there was a multi-dozen majorities, this wouldn't matter. The discharge petition would not be an issue. Is that right?
I think so. This is largely a math problem. I thought you said there'd be no math here, Howard. But the fact that it is such a narrow majority, we are seeing on these successful discharge petitions a large number of Democrats teaming up with a handful of Republicans, and that's how they are able to get to 218, that magic number that they need to force votes on legislation on the House floor.
Okay, now three real-life examples of the discharge petition in action on topics many of us talk about and think about right now. First, health care and Affordable Care Act subsidies, which were set to expire at the end of 2025. From a November 20th, 2025 press conference, here's House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries.
We have a discharge petition. I believe it has north of 200 signatures on it. All we need is 3 or 4 Republicans to join us. And if they did so, we can discharge a bill that would extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits for 3 years.
The last legislative day in Congress in 2025 was December 17th. That day, the House debated the expiring health care subsidies. Here's Ranking Democrat on the Rules Committee, Jim McGovern.
But, Mr. Speaker, I have an important announcement to make. And if there's anybody in the press gallery listening, I want them to hear this. You know, I have called on Republicans to put country over politics, put country over their party, to do the right thing for their constituents. And we have a discharge petition that 214 Democrats have signed on to force a bill on a 3-year clean extension. And while we have been debating, 4 Republicans have actually done that. We are now at 218. And what that means is that it sets in place a process that will allow us to vote on a clean extension. And we have 218 people who will vote for it, which means we will pass it. But unfortunately, the procedures around a discharge petition mean that we can't get to it until we come back from our holiday break, so in January.
That development on the Republican side also got the attention of the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer.
There's breaking news this morning, good news, that the discharge petition in the House got the necessary 218 signatures to move forward. It shows that the demand by the American people for Congress, the House and the Senate, to extend the ACA premium tax credits is undeniable. Yet Republican leaders inside the House and the Senate are making it clear that they are opposed and will be responsible for health care costs rising through the roof.
As far as Republicans, the next day on December 18th, 2025, New York Congressman Mike Lawler appeared on C-SPAN's Washington Journal.
This was a bipartisan compromise that we put forward. We worked with Republican leadership to try and get this on the floor for an up or down vote. Unfortunately, for a myriad of reasons, including Hyde language pertaining to federal funding of abortion, as well as the fact that many of my colleagues do not want to extend these temporary subsidies that were put in place during COVID to serve as a temporary enhancement. We couldn't get an agreement with leadership to put the bill on the floor. No. And so that really led to the 4 of us that signed the discharge being left with no choice but to force a vote.
Okay, Scott Wong of NBC News. Let's talk a discharge petition and the ACA and healthcare subsidies.
So what's happening here is you have Mike Lawler and recognizing that the window is quickly closing. It's the end of 2025. The subsidies for 22 million Americans are about to expire. Their healthcare premiums are about to go up significantly. And these moderate, vulnerable Republicans see that window closing. The 4 who signed on, Lawler, along with 3 Pennsylvania Republicans, Brian Fitzpatrick, who we discussed earlier, Rob Bresnahan, Ryan McKenzie, all facing very difficult elections in 2026 this year, all sign on, join with Democrats on Hakeem Jeffries' discharge petition, put them over the top. They hit that magic number of 218, but then Congress goes home for the holidays and no vote is held. Well, that issue hung over the holidays. When Congress got back this month, they then took that bill up on the floor. They were able to force that vote on the floor. It passed this time with 17 Republicans. So you went from 4 who signed on to force that vote to 17 actually voted on this clean extension of ACA subsidies. That's a huge number. And what that tells me is, number one, that Republicans feel very vulnerable on this particular issue of health care. We've been talking about this for months and months now. They know that this is going to be a key election year issue. They needed to show their voters back home that they supported extending these expired ACA subsidies. But it does show and really underscore how this issue is a huge vulnerability for House Republicans.
So it's a mixture of politics and policy then. It's in one brew. It's both going on at the same time.
Yeah, and you're hearing Democrats, Democrats, look, they shut the government down over the ACA issue, demanding that, the extension be tied to any sort of government funding last year. We saw that record-long 43-day shutdown. We saw this issue continue into December and the holiday weeks, and it's going to continue to be a huge, huge election year issue for the upcoming midterms in 2026.
There is a distinction between signing a discharge petition and then voting for a discharge petition. Those are two separate procedural acts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually had to revisit this because there were Republicans who tweeted out on that day that the 4 Republicans signed on to this ACA discharge, I have signed the discharge petition, when in fact you went back to the record and their names were nowhere to be found. Because once you hit that magic number of 218, the matter is closed. And so members had intended to sign on, but once they hit 218, it was almost a race to be that 218th signature, because once that happens, and these Republicans wanted to demonstrate, hey, look, I'm fighting for my district. I'm fighting for the thousands in my district who are seeing their premiums go up, when in fact that matter had come to a close. But they were able on that second vote to go ahead and vote for the actual legislation on the floor.
So likewise, if you don't vote for the discharge petition, you can still, if you don't sign the discharge petition, you can still vote for it and say,
sure,
I'm on the correct side of the issue.
Sure. Yeah.
Tricky.
It's interesting. I did have to look that up myself.
Interesting. Okay. One more question on this. When we play the Jim McGovern clip, he says if there's anybody in the press gallery listening, I'm curious, Scott, for you and your work, are you in the press gallery? Where are you when this is happening?
Well, I work in the basement of the Capitol. I have actually for most of my 16 years on the Hill. I've worked on the Senate side for some of that period, but now I'm mostly on the House side, down in the basement of the Capitol, frequently watching the proceedings of the floor. But when I'm not, in those press rooms downstairs, I'm frequently roaming the halls where I find the best stories, simply running into lawmakers who are walking to or from votes, or running into staffers or lobbyists. That's the best part about being in the Capitol is, there's always a story if you just go take a walk around the building and talk to people.
Before we get to the next set of clips, how can people find what Scott Wong is reporting?
I'm on all sorts of social media, including X, and you could find me mostly tweeting on X at Scott Wong DC.
And on the NBC News website too? Or
certainly, NBCnews.com, where we publish all of our stories on, everything on Congress and everything on Washington and everything on sports and business as well.
And if you want to see what Scott Wong looks like, just watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal every other day. All right. Okay. Now our second example of how the discharge petition is used in the current Congress, Jeffrey Epstein. On September 3rd, 2025, members from both parties held a news conference advocating a discharge petition that would compel the release of all the Epstein investigation files. The lawmakers were joined by multiple survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. Here's Democrat from California, Ro Khanna.
There is something that is rotten in Washington. Less than 1% of these files have been released. We are demanding today on the discharge petition that all of the files be released. We know we have 212 Democrats, and we have 4 Republicans, courageous Republicans like Thomas Massie, Nancy Mace, who was so emotional yesterday after talking to the survivors, Congresswoman Boebert, and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. We need just 2 more signatures to force the release.
Also speaking at that September 2025 press conference, former Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
And I want to thank Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie for doing something brave, crossing political boundaries for a very important fight. And I'm honored to join both of them. and I'm honored that Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert signed the discharge petition along with myself. And I ask my Republican colleagues not to choose just one path for justice and transparency and accountability, but I ask my Republican colleagues to choose every path for justice and accountability and transparency.
On November 12, 2025, Speaker Johnson swore in a new member of Congress, Arizona Democrat Adelita Grijalva. The swearing-in occurred after a nearly 2-month delay following her election to succeed her late father, and it occurred on the same day House Democrats released emails related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Right after the oath, Congresswoman Grijalva addressed the full House.
That's what the American people expect us to do. Fight for them. That is why I will sign the discharge petition right now to release the Epstein files.
A week later, floor debate on Jeffrey Epstein. We heard earlier from Congressman Jim McGovern, ranking member of the Rules Committee, when we talked about health care. Now we hear him again, November 18, 2025. This time he's talking about Jeffrey Epstein and his amendment to release the files. But Democrat McGovern also did something quite unusual. During the floor debate, he yielded speaking time to a member of the opposite party.
Republicans were so afraid of my amendment that Speaker Johnson shut down the Rules Committee and sent us home early in July. And then he refused to swear in a new member of Congress for weeks because she promised to be the 218th signature to force this bill forward. Only four Republicans signed the discharge petition. Every single Democrat signed on. In a few moments, I'm going to yield time to Representative Massey, who has been the Republican leader of this effort in the House, alongside Representative Khanna on the Democratic side.
Speaking after Democrat Jim McGovern, here's another Republican from South Carolina, Nancy Mace.
And while we often have many disagreements about a lot of issues, maybe most issues, today they are allowing us to speak on the floor, and I want to thank my colleagues, Congressman Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Lauren Boebert, the four of us making history today over the discharge petition and delivering justice for those who have desperately fought for it for, in some cases, almost 30 years. I wore white today because I wanted to reflect on the innocence of the young women who had their innocence stolen from a demon named Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay, Scott Wong, the discharge petition, and Jeffrey Epstein.
A lot to unpack there. We've obviously focused a lot on the two men who have been leading this effort, Ro Khanna, as you mentioned, Democrat from California, Thomas Massey, Republican from Kentucky. But this trio of GOP women, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, without them signing on to this discharge petition, none of this would have happened. Thousands and thousands of pages of these Epstein files would be still under lock and key at the Justice Department. And so they deserve a lot of credit. They were under enormous pressure. MTG, you remember, the president called her traitor. She has paid a huge political price for standing up to fight for the release of these files, standing up to the White House and her own party. She not only decided not to seek re-election under these threats to herself and her family, but she has resigned from Congress altogether just early this year. Secondly, Nancy Mace, who you pointed out and had that clip from, she is a candidate for governor in South Carolina, but she has spoken extensively about her own experiences with sexual abuse. And so for some of these people, this is a very personal and traumatic issue. This is an issue, I think, where you have, they got to 218, they were able to build support for that in the Congress. And what happened was, sometimes in Congress, things can happen very, very quickly, right? This was an issue that had been hanging out over the Congress for months and months and months, and then all of a sudden one day it passed the House. nearly unanimously. Only one Republican, Clay Higgins of Louisiana, voted no. That same day, the Senate said, we don't want to deal with this issue. They passed the Epstein Files bill by voice vote. Not a single person was recorded in that vote, and sent it on to the president, who signed the bill in a quiet sort of way, not with a big pomp and circumstance, but quietly signed it into law.
You know, that's such an interesting point, that some of these issues, the discharge petition we're talking about, it takes a long time. I mean, there's a long, to get to 218, there's a lot of work. Your point is this one just happened essentially overnight, and I imagine that's uncommon. And does the House leadership, the Republican leadership, then just get out of the way, or and just watch the wave coming toward them? How do they react?
A wave is a good description of this, because even in the week prior to that final vote in the House, there was discussion about, well, this is never going to pass, or they're not going to get there. And then all of a sudden, you could feel the momentum in the building shifting. And then the question became, sort of, what side of history are you going to be on here? Are you going to be for transparency and putting all these files out into the public and letting the public make a decision? Or are you going to try to, conceal all these files and keep them, concealed at the Department of Justice? And so I think people had to really look inward. There was also a groundswell of support in people's states and hometown districts, and voters were clamoring for members of Congress to vote to release those files.
All right, two political questions, and then we'll move on to the third set. You mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene. When we started talking about doing this, Scott, and we started pulling the clips, she was a current member of Congress, and that was just a couple of weeks ago. Now she's a former member of Congress, so we had to update this a little bit.
Yeah.
What did the I'm trying to know. I mean, you're a junkie of politics. Is this the first time a discharge petition has led to a member of Congress resigning?
That's a very specific thing. I don't have the answer to that, but
neither do I, for that matter.
It is very rare. Yeah, it's very rare. I think her resignation was a shock to many. People are trying to understand political motivations. There's discussion of, does MTG want to run for president in the future? Will she be a candidate in 2028? Could this be some sort of political calculation? But I think when you listen to her, and I've spoken to her many times over her tenure here in the Congress, when you listen to her, she was genuinely fearful for her life, and specifically the threats made to her children. And she was upset that it had reached this point. There was some frustration, but there was also some fear. And I think that was what was driving her decision in a big way.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm going to ask, now the Democratic side, this time I won't pose in the form of a question, so I won't put you on the spot. But when we played the clip from Congresswoman Grijalva swearing in, and I didn't pick up on this first, but that was a big applause line when she said, I'm going to sign the discharge petition. I don't remember A, discharge petition being mentioned in a maiden speech on the floor of Congress, and B, that being the biggest applause line that she got. And going back to the politics of that a couple months ago, that was a big deal for her not coming and being sworn in for a while. And then when she sworn, she walked over to the side of the rostrum and signed the discharge petition. So
she was the 218th signature on that Epstein discharge petition, putting them over the top and ensuring that a vote would be held to release the files. If you'll remember, she was caught up in that huge government funding fight, the shutdown fight, 43 days, where Speaker Johnson said, we're not coming back into session because we already passed a government funding bill, and until Democrats in the Senate agree to pass funding, we're not going to return to session. Well, Adelita Grijalva got caught up in that whole mix. She had won her special election to replace her late father, Raul Grijalva, but she had not been sworn in yet. And so she was caught in this strange limbo. And Democrats made it known that they believed the reason Speaker Johnson was not swearing her in, they said he could have if he really wanted to, was to prevent or to delay any sort of vote on the Epstein files, because he knew that she represented that 218th signature on the discharge petition.
And in retrospect, before we move on, but in retrospect, it didn't matter because, as you pointed out, it was an overwhelming vote in the end, and it's almost like quaint to look back and when that one vote mattered, when they all ended up signing it and voting for it and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Speaker was making some sort of calculation perhaps that, if you delay something long enough, you never know what's going to happen. And maybe he was just giving himself some options on that. His people and he himself would say that, no, he wasn't playing politics with her. He just simply wanted Democrats to pass the government funding bill.
Gotcha. Okay. Now our third example of a discharge petition in action, banning members of Congress from trading stocks while in office. On September 3rd, 2025, a bipartisan group held a press conference suggesting it is unethical and unfair that members of Congress trade stocks and earn profits based on information from their own votes on legislation. In this clip, you'll hear New York Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's followed immediately by Florida Republican Anna Paulina Luna.
And I look forward to bringing this to a vote. I look forward to banning the trading of individual stock on the floor and by members of Congress. And I'm looking forward to making this place a better place that puts the American people first. So thank you all so much.
Thank you for everyone for being here. As you know, the group behind us has been very vocal on this topic, and not to reiterate what Chip Roy had stated, but I think it's 95% of Americans support this. I sometimes feel like an adjudicator in this job, so I guess I'll be the one to say that we've asked nicely for leadership to put this on the floor. If they don't, I'm saying timeline is end of month. There's a discharge petition prepared and ready to go. I think it's very clear where the White House stands on this. I don't speak for the White House, but the president has stated that he supports banning this because it is corrupt. Frankly, the fact that members are getting, plus 600% returns on their investments is wrong. But more importantly, how could you ever be expected to represent your constituents when you're clearly worried about your pocketbook? And so that's why we're here today. Again, thank you to Representative Burchett because he helped work on that discharge.
On December 2nd, 2025, Representative Luna presented the discharge petition to the House clerk. 2 days later, she appeared on C-SPAN's Washington Journal.
What is the status of your discharge petition on the ban on stock trading?
Well, I just introduced it literally maybe less than 36 hours ago. We have both Democrat and Republican members every single day that are signing on to it. And then I also heard actually this morning that Speaker Johnson is having a meeting with some of those holdouts in the Republican Party and also talking to Democrat members as well that might not necessarily be as on board with this legislation. But the thing is that I'm open to amending the legislation as long as we're stopping and making it very difficult for the insider trading to take place. Even just yesterday, there was a letter where over 90 members of former members of Congress had written a letter to both Hakeem Jeffries and the Speaker of the House. This included Democrats, Republicans, and independents, saying that insider trading is a problem in Washington, D.C. What's been interesting is you'll see that there is a lot of people from behind the scenes that are trying to tank this process, but no one wants to come out and publicly tell the American people or their voters that they're going to block the legislation to really take down the insider trading happening here in D.C. So there's a big internal war that we have, and it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats as well.
Do you blame the Speaker for not bringing this legislation to the floor?
No, I don't necessarily blame him because there was a House admin hearing where they chose, meaning the individual who's in charge of that committee chose to make this a closed-door hearing, meaning that other members like myself or Representative Magaziner or Jayapal or Chip Roy or Tim Burchett, who have been championing this legislation, couldn't gavel on and actually speak to the issues that exist here in Congress on that topic. But I will say that there is no excuse for why this legislation hasn't been moved sooner. And that is why I chose to act in good faith with the discharge petition.
Okay, Scott Wong, the discharge petition, and now the stock trading ban.
So, Howard, what's clear here is that some of these successful discharge petition efforts have emboldened others in the Capitol to act. And here we see Congresswoman Luna putting forward this new discharge petition effort to essentially ban members of Congress from being able to own or trade stocks. It's not even her bill per se. This is a bill by Chip Roy and the Republican from Texas, and Seth Magaziner, a Democrat. And so, but she is the one who filed the petition on some of her colleagues' legislation. This is an issue that has overwhelming support, as she said, among the public, among voters. And that is something in common with the Epstein files issue as well, right? That was something that the American public was clamoring for, release the files. They wanted those files released, and it happened. So in part, you know, while you are quietly building support inside the Capitol, it also is imperative for these lawmakers to build support outside the Capitol, to have that public pressure on lawmakers to try to get to that magic number of 218. They're nowhere close. To be clear, they're nowhere close to 218 right now. I think the last time I checked, they're somewhere around 80 signatures. Most of those Democrats, about a dozen Republicans, which is a good sign. But what this effort has done, and the fact that Congresswoman Luna is so outspoken and willing to go on all the airwaves and talk about this issue, it has forced leadership, Speaker Johnson and his team, to try to come up with some creative solution to address the stock trading issue. So they're working on separate legislation, maybe slightly watered down, that would allow lawmakers to continue to hold on to some stocks. There's a separate legislation pursued by Democratic leadership, which they're trying to build support for. The bipartisan one is somewhere in the middle, so it's unclear which of these competing ideas will win out. But the discharge effort, or the threat of a discharge petition, has now forced the debate, forced lawmakers to try to come up with some sort of a solution that the American public see as clearly a big problem.
All right, I have 20, 30 questions based on what you just said, because it's all fascinating. Let me try to limit it to 2 or 3 here. First of all, I love your point. It's not even her bill. If you are, I'm not saying that she is in this case, but if you just love chaos, if you just love or hate the speaker, you could just file discharge petitions on every issue just to cause trouble. Is that?
Well, the problem with that is if you lead and nobody follows, does anything really happen? The answer is no. And so for the discharge petition to be deployed successfully, or to put political pressure on the leadership, you need to have followers. And so that's why 77 is a decent number. We're not close to 218, but I think leadership in both parties recognize that this is a palpable issue that voters care about. It is a key election year. There's going to be pressure on all lawmakers, both in the House and Senate, when they're back in their districts or their home states, ask the question, do you support members of Congress owning and trading stock, when we have seen lawmakers make a ton of money in the stock market over the years? There's allegations, of course, of insider trading. There have been convictions of members of Congress for insider trading in the past. And so this is a campaign issue. It's also a practical issue that members of the public care about.
Yeah, as we've been saying the whole time, these are not, it's a rule, potentially an obscure rule, but the issues, that the underlying fundamental issues, are real life issues that people care about. Forgive me if you don't know this, and if I'm putting you on the spot. How many discharge petitions are there currently floating around Capitol Hill right now? Like, how many different clauses are there?
It resets each Congress. I bet there's probably about a dozen that have been filed in this Congress. Now, they had been extremely, extremely rare. As we were talking about at the start of our conversation, the last successful one before this flurry of discharge petitions in 2024 and 2025 was 2015 and the XM Bank. Even before 2015. The previous one was back in 2002, I looked up. McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform, which successfully passed both chambers and then was signed into law by then President George Bush. So they were far and few between. They do go back more than 100 years, the idea or the rule of the discharge petition, which just essentially means it discharges any bill from the committee that had been sort of holding it up or blocking it. But these had been far and few between for decades and decades, and then only recently have we seen this flurry of activity.
So this makes the case, and you've done the reporting, and many of your congressional colleagues have done the reporting, how complicated life is, in particular for Speaker Johnson. I mean, of all the things he has to face with the thin majority, President Trump, everything, this is a real life. I mean, these are just members of Congress who will keep pushing their own agenda that may or may not be part of his leadership agenda, but it's their agenda, and it's something that they have to battle all the time.
Right. A number of speakers describe the speakership as herding cats, and that's when you have a large majority. He has such a tenuous majority. In fact, Tim Burchett, the Republican congressman from Tennessee, who is a favorite of reporters because his quotes are so colorful and he's so accessible, he told me the other day, it really feels like we're one bad flu season away from losing the majority. That's how tenuous Johnson's grip is on this majority. I think if you talk to a lot of election prognosticators today, they will say it looks like the House is going to flip control come November just because of the narrow majority, because of Trump's low approval numbers, and just looking back on history, of these midterm election years when typically you do see the House of Representatives flip control from the party that's in the White House.
Okay, we're going to play one more clip in a second, a bonus clip for you, Scott. But I have to ask you, if the House does flip and the Democrats get the majority, does the new speaker, a Democrat, if it's a Democratic speaker, are we talking about discharge petition again, but just other issues in the other party, or do you think this goes away?
Well, certainly because the Democrats would not control the White House, a discharge petition could be used, on some sorts of bipartisan matters. I suppose that could be the case. I haven't thought all the way through, but certainly it is a tool that remains regardless of which party is controlling the majority and the speaker's gavel.
We haven't really addressed it. I do want to address that right now, the role of President Trump and all this. We mentioned him briefly in the Jeffrey Epstein, but does he weigh in on does he care? Does he follow this that you know of? Does he put the thumb on the scale for any of these discharge petitions to happen or not happen?
I'm guessing that until recently, the president wasn't too concerned about discharge petitions. Probably wasn't something that he gets in the weeds on and talks to his legislative and policy staff. But when it came to the Epstein files, from our reporting and the reporting of other outlets, he was on the phone with people like MTG, with other Republicans who had signed on, very engaged, obviously very upset with the way that was heading. He was talking to other Republicans, telling them don't join this effort, this sort of rogue effort by MTG and Thomas Massie and others. So he was engaged in that respect. In the end, he decided, and the White House decided, that he would sign that bill into law. Clearly, they saw that as a political liability had he vetoed it or did a pocket veto or something like that. So in the end, they took the loss and and then moved on to fight another day.
And now a bonus clip. Returning to Representative Luna, last year she was involved in another discharge petition effort. She spoke about it on the House floor April 1st, 2025.
As many of you might know, for over 2 years now, I've been championing the cause to allow new female members of Congress the right to vote. Some of the American people might be surprised that if you are a female member and you have a child that you can't vote, which means that you can't execute your constitutional authority. For almost 2 years now in this cause, I've met with leadership and I've exhausted all tools in my legislative toolkit to be able to bring this to the floor. As I was met with much opposition, I finally used the last tool that I had at my disposal, which was something known as a discharge petition, where I collected 218 signatures and expanded the ability to vote while recovering from childbirth, not just to mothers, but also to young fathers in our governing body. Now leadership, because of the fact that they don't like that I was successful at this, is now trying to change the rules. But I want to talk about how fundamentally dangerous this rule change is.
Okay, Scott Wong, any reaction to this? We talked about Representative Luna and other issues. This is from 2025, another discharge petition effort that she's talking about.
Yeah, what's interesting about Luna is she is a top Trump ally. She's from Florida, Trump's home state and favorite state. But she is increasingly a thorn in the side of the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and his leadership team. She has brought not one but two discharge petitions, and may be successful on now a second discharge petition when it comes to banning stock trading. So interesting. You know that she is very stressful to the leadership team, but again, this is a tool. I'll repeat again. This is a tool of the rank and file, and it's in the rule book, and it has successfully been deployed. And I think we are going to see perhaps several more discharge petitions in the coming year, given this very, very narrow majority.
All right, I'm going to completely put you on the spot now because I need a trivia question, Scott, for this podcast. So here's, I've not prepped you for this. It just came to me. Which current member of Congress has signed the greatest number of discharge petitions?
I could not tell you.
Right.
I could
well,
not tell
me.
you. Yeah.
All right.
I don't know the answer to that.
All right.
Maybe we could ask ChatGPT.
There you go. Perfect. Scott, I'm going to thank you for coming in, but I do want to. This has been so interesting, and I appreciate you doing the podcast. You've wanted to, and it's great to have you. But boy, you've made this issue, which seems arcane and obscure, come alive with real life issues that matter to American people. So I just want to thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me. Big fan of the podcast. Hopefully we could do this again sometime.
Fabulous. Well, actually, let's do it after three more discharge petitions. We'll update the public on that.
Very good.
All right, Scott Wong of NBC News. And now for our closing music. At the beginning of this podcast, we heard Ross Perot in 1993 promote a threatening song called I'll Remember in November. Now, back to that C-SPAN interview. And we end this episode of Extreme Mortman with the musical stylings of Ross Perot.
I think I talked to you earlier about this new song that's out. It's an average citizen that's singing a song.
Your new theme song?
The possible theme song. It says, I'll remember you in '94.
Remember me, you're taking all my money. Remember me, you gave my job away. Remember me, or I am just a number who wants to work and doesn't qualify for foreign aid. It goes on and on by Steve Voss. When's this coming out?
Well, pretty soon. And we'll be using it this weekend in our rallies in all the states.
Is there a tune? I mean, is there
yes. No, it's on disc. It's on compact disc. And we're getting covered up by radio stations that are interested. I'll remember in November as I step into the little booth. I'll remember in November to vote for anyone but you.